I bought this failed project bike for nice and cheap to see if it's possible to finish what the last owner started and sell it for a profit. All as part of my challenge to flip my way from £100 up to an e-bike that I plan to give away to my dad at the end of this series. So follow along to this episode to find out if this unflippable bike was a bargain in disguise or a massive mistake. So this is a Voodoo AZ that I picked up earlier in the week. Now the sellers of this bike were two young lads that had had a crack at trying to flip this bike. Now these two lads were very honest about the problems that the bike had and the fact that they were unable to flip it, and I think that's a really admirable quality to know where your limits are. Anyway, they were asking £90 for this bike, and having discussed the issues with them, and I'll talk about that in a minute, I put in an offer of just £50 for the bike. They came back and they were pretty stern that £80 was the minimum that they could go and that it's still a really good bike, it's got a lot of potential. And I agree with the potential part because you do see these bikes regularly go for the £200, maybe £210 kind of mark in a nice done up condition. So I came back to them and I said, look, the bike needs a lot doing to it. I appreciate that you want this much, but really the absolute maximum that I can go is 60 quid. And after a little bit of back and forth, they eventually agreed and I bought the bike for £60. What I'll normally do is a walk around of the bike to show you the condition, but I will just preface this by saying that there is a hell of a lot that needs doing to this bike. I don't think it's going to be an easy flip. I'm not even 100% certain that we're going to make a profit on this, but this is a challenge. Yes, of course, the aim of this series is to make profit on each bike, but that said, I also want to be challenging myself and learning new skills about bike mechanics and bike flipping. And so I just really want to document the whole process and take you all along with me. And hopefully you learn something along the way. I know certainly in the last video, there was a lot of comments of useful tips and tricks that people were spending their time to freely give out. And I think that's really how you learn, is having a go at stuff, listening to feedback, learning and understanding from your mistakes, and just having a go and challenging yourself at these sorts of things. So anyway, let's go do a little bit of a deeper dive into the bike and its condition. This is going to be interesting. Right, okay, I'm going to whiz through the issues that this bike has and then we can crack on getting on and trying to fix this up. So as a general condition, the frame, it's pretty gunked up. There's a few little scratches and paint marks on here, but I think, judging from what we've done previously, I think it's actually kind of the least of our worries with this bike. So rear wheel, bearings are okay, they don't feel rattly, but we'll have a closer inspection of that once we've taken the back wheel off. So the rear tyre is flat, needs a new inner tube, has got a reasonable amount of tread, so I think once we have fixed that, it might be reusable. As you can see, the drivetrain is fairly gunked up. It needs a good deep clean. In the last episode, we made a bit of a cock up with the chain. Probably should have replaced it to bring it up to the standard that I wanted to. So what I've done is to order a new chain wear gauge that's arriving today. So I'll be able to measure this chain properly and see if it needs replacing. I'm going to hazard a guess that it will need replacing based on the amount of rust that's on there. But again, that's something to measure later on and replace if we need to. The pedals, don't know if you can hear that, have got a little bit of play to them. And so I think what we'll do here is we'll take these off, give them a service, tighten them up, give them a coat of spray paint and clear coat as we did in the last episode. Again, it just made it look a lot nicer. I can't really tell with this bottom bracket. It feels like it's running smoothly and I can't feel any play, but it's one of those items that we'll find out later on when we start to strip the bike down. The rear brake is one of the only things on this bike that I think is functioning how I would like it. The brakes don't feel spongy at all. They feel pretty good, but again, as part of this, we'll give it a good clean, good decontamination of both the rotors and the pads. As you can see, yet again, the caliper has been removed on the front wheel, so that might mean that the rotor's warped again. And actually, do you know what? That's running fairly true. So I don't think we're going to have to replace that. I don't know if you can hear that though. I think those front wheel bearings are certainly in need of a service and tighten. So that's another thing to add to the list. The forks are functional, but as you can see there, there's quite a lot of gunk build-up. Give these stanchions a nice clean up. As you saw in the intro, the headset is incredibly wobbly. So I'm thinking it's either incredibly worn out, it's not been installed correctly, or it's not being installed at all. So when we start stripping the bike down, I'm sure we'll figure out what that is exactly. As you can see with the grips, completely worn out, needs a new pair of grips, and just needs a little bit of a touch up on some of these items here to get it looking fresh again. But the main stinker with this one, take your attention away from the saddle, that's the least of the issue. It's actually the fact that the seat post is seized in the frame, and that was the key problem with this bike and the reason why it was so cheap. I think if we're unable to remove this seat post, then I think it's highly likely that we're going to make a loss here, because if we strip the bike down, clean up the components and sell them all individually, I just can't see us pulling back £60 back out of this. So as I say, a little bit foolish from my end, but you've got to try these things in life and have a go at a few silly challenges every now and again. But regardless, we're going to push on, strip the bike down completely and start to clean up some of those components anyway. And then in the background, I'm going to be working to try and remove this stuck seat post. Wish me luck. And just to add to the mess, I've just realised that the brake line is split as well, so we'll have to sort that out. Right, so I've just started disassembling the bike. Sorry, I will move on to a time lapse in a minute. And I've just realised, taking the top cap off, that, which is the little split ring, which normally goes just under here and seats the bearing properly, it should most definitely not be up here. So that might be the reason why the headset's so wobbly. Doesn't mean that it's not worn and needs replacement. So we're certainly not in the clear yet. Right, so as far as teardowns go, that one was actually pretty quick. You can see how quite a lot of the components are or were corroded. I'd hazard a guess that this bike hasn't maybe been the best looked after. So I think the real challenge now is to try and free this seat post. I think this whole bike now rests on being able to remove and free this seat post. Now what I've started out by doing is getting one of these little pieces of metal from an inner tube kit, and just to slowly slide it in around the edge. So I've just gone in and sprayed a little bit of WD-40 into here. Now I'm not 100% sure whether WD-40 is the best penetrant to use at this stage, but it is the only thing that I've got to hand. So I'm going to see how it goes, and then if that doesn't work, I'll do a little bit more research and see if I can find something else. Now one thing I've just noticed is there's a little grommet here for where a dropper post cable will go, and that's really handy because it means we don't have to take the bottom bracket out, which by the way is perfectly fine. It means we don't have to take the bottom bracket out to be able to spray penetrant up into the seat post through the bottom. So I'm going to try my best to maybe free this a little bit better, and then I'll catch up with you in a bit. Okay, seem to be making some progress here. So what I've done is to lay the bike on the floor, put my foot on this, and then use the bike itself as a lever to try and rotate the seat post just to free it up a little bit. And you can see there that I have been kind of successful in getting it at least moving. So that's promising. At least it's not 100% stuck. Now we've just got to keep on working to free it, and then hopefully we can free it enough to yank it out of the frame. Yes. So that was probably one of the more challenging things I've had to do so far. Oh, look at that. That will focus. The question now is, can I reuse that seat post? I'm going to do a little bit of digging online and see what I can find. But because I don't have like a workshop bench or advice or anything like that, I had to get a little bit creative with the old steering lock, clamping it in and then actually threading the steering lock through the saddle wire here, and that actually was strong enough to hold it and stop the saddle from rotating. But apart from that, I think the next step is to get the components cleaned up, ready for servicing, and then putting back on the bike. So here I'm just using some diluted detergent and a medium bristle brush to agitate the dust, dirt and debris. Rinsing it down with water gets 90% of the worst off. I can then wipe the rest off later with a rag. These brake rotors were pretty manky, so once I got the mud removed, I used a brake cleaner and some light sandpaper to remove any contamination from the rotors. As you can see, they look a lot nicer, but hopefully they also perform better as well. I also gave the components a good scrub and used some Evaporust to get rid of any surface rust. A commenter on the last video kindly recommended that I use gunk degreaser to get rid of the old sludge. I managed to pick this up and applied it to the worst components with a brush. Whilst this did a great job of loosening the gunk, the instructions don't advise releasing it into the environment, so rather than rinsing with water, I had to remove the residue with an old cloth. I then moved on to servicing those rattly pedals. This is quite similar to doing a wheel bearing service, except these ball bearings are really tiny, and so I had to spend ages searching for the ones that had dropped onto the floor and rolled away. So I've never really done this before, but it did make a huge difference to how the pedals felt, so I'm definitely going to be doing it on my own bikes at some point as well. These coil forks had a fair amount of gunk on the stanchions, so I took the lower legs off, gave them a good clean down and wipe, which got them looking nice again. I also applied some thick grease to the lower legs to hopefully make them last longer. One thing that I wanted to do was to replace the seals, but the lead time on the spares for these was a couple of weeks, so I had to leave the current ones on. Next, I gave the frame a good clean up using some soapy water, and then followed this with some polish to get rid of the scratches. I also made up some touch-up paint. It wasn't a perfect match, but good enough to bring up the frame to an acceptable finish. Right, so I've left these headset bearings dunked in this spirit for a couple of days, and I'm not too sure how they're going to turn out. So my thinking is I'll clean these up and then get them back in the bike and just see how they perform, and if they're gritty and horrible and there's any play in them, then I'll just replace them because they're not too expensive. What I'm really hoping is that the last owner just put the headset back together incorrectly and that they didn't ride with it in that wobbly condition that I got it in, because I think that really would mess up the bearings and potentially the fork as well. So hopefully they didn't do that. So this one has come up looking okay, so I think we'll see if we can reuse it, and if not, just buy a new set. So when I was outside giving the components a clean, I noticed that the tyres have got this cracking all the way along the side. I don't know whether that's a bit of dry rot or something like that, but it's all the way down to the wire, as you can see there. And so I think with brakes and tyres, it's one of those things where I don't think it's worth mucking around with and cheaping out on. So as much as it's going to take a huge dent in the profit, I think I'm going to have to replace both tyres with brand new ones, which again, it's not ideal, but I just don't feel right with the bike leaving in this condition. So if it takes a dent out of the profit, it takes a dent out of the profit. Right, okay, so we're making a start on reassembling the bike now. So what I've just done is, while the tyres are off, to give the wheels a quick bearing service. You've seen me do that before, and also true up the wheels as well. What on earth has happened here? There's patches all over the place in this inner tube, and this is bulging like mad. So I think we'll just put a new inner tube in this. So as you can see, the brake line is split there, and it was weeping out. So I would imagine that the front brakes were pretty much unusable. Now I've tried to remove this nozzle part here, and it just won't come out. I don't know if it's bonded to this part, and looking online there isn't too much information. So my original plan was to shorten this section to a part that wasn't split, and then see if I could get a hold of one of these nozzles, but I can't seem to find them, and I certainly don't feel comfortable reusing this. So in the essence of time, I'm just going to replace the entire unit, a bit like we did in the last episode. Again, not great from a profit perspective, but brakes are one of those things that I just don't think are worth mucking around with, especially if I'm not 100% certain I know what I'm doing. I then reassembled the cranks. This time I've invested in some thread lock to stop the cranks from coming loose in future. I then got the front and rear derailleurs installed. I actually installed this one slightly wrong in the clip, but I fix it later on. The cable for the rear derailleur was pretty knackered, so I installed a new one with one of the spare cables that I had lying around. So I've just got the front derailleur on, and I'm pretty certain that this is not right. So clearly this is the original mounting. I think it's called a direct mount or something like that. What we have here on the bike is a clamp mount, and as you can see, it doesn't look right. It's just way too high. You can't actually get this any lower. So I'm going to put a chain on, see if it works, and if it does, great, but if it doesn't, I think we're going to have to look to see if we can buy direct mounted front derailleurs. So I wasn't sure if I'd be able to reuse this seat post. So I've done a little bit of digging online, and I put out a poll on the channel as well. So thank you for all that answered that. And I think the general consensus is that I can reuse this as long as it's not damaged or fractured or there's any cracks anywhere. And I certainly can't see any of that. The other thing was that, of course, we're going to have to use anti-seize on this to prevent it from doing it again. And I've also had a go at really cleaning out the seat tube as well. So I'm hoping that should all be okay. So we've got our part tool anti-seize here. Interesting, it's like a metallic-y kind of compound. Probably used way too much. Probably better to have too much and the seat post slip a little bit than to have not enough and have it stick and seize again. Okay, let's get that all nicely on there. Okay, I think that's good coverage. Ooh, pop the seat close, clamp on. Oh, nice. Okay, that felt a lot better. Get that seat post clamp other way. There we go. Let's get that cleaned up and then clamp back on. Also got these green zip ties to colour match. Can't say I'm the biggest fan of the colour, but just the little finishing touches. I also ordered some new grips to replace the knackered old ones. I then got the gear cables trimmed down and crimped to finish off the bike. So with that, here is a quick before and after. So I'm in kind of two minds about this bike because on one hand, yes, when I bought it, I knew it was a spares and repairs project. I knew it was going to need some amount of time and money spent on it to bring it up to the standard that I wanted it to be. But I don't think I quite anticipated how much time and how much effort I was going to have to spend on it. Now we'll run through the numbers once the bike is sold. And I don't like to be negative about these things, but being realistic, I think the hourly rate on this is going to be pretty poor. On the other hand though, I think I'm quite happy with how this bike has turned out. I've just taken it for a ride around the block and then just brought it back to do some final adjustments with the gears and stuff. I think the fact that it's got a new gear cable, new chain, new tyres, the wheel bearings have been serviced, new saddle, new grips and that sort of thing. I think it's functionally a lot nicer. And because the frame's had a polish and it's had a touch up in a few areas and it's had a deep clean as well, I think visually it's looking a lot nicer as well. Whilst I'm really happy with how the bike has turned out, I'm going to go for a middle of the road type approach to the price. And that's for two reasons. Number one is because the bike is being currently sold by Halfords, which is the shop that originally sold this bike. They're selling a refurbished version of this bike on sale currently for £355. So I think most people are going to anchor their price against that. So I can't charge too much in that regard. Right or wrong, I think people are going to value a second-hand bike from a proper shop than they are from an individual. And if you've watched the other episodes in this series, you'll know apart from this bike, all the second-hand bikes that I bought had more problems than what the previous owner described in their listing. And so yeah, I completely agree. I think most people, when they're buying a second-hand bike, would much rather buy it from a brick and mortar shop than they would do from an individual. And so of course that translates into a difference in monetary value. The second reason why I can't charge as much is because everything I can find about this bike's spec online suggests that it should come with air-sprung suspension on the front. However, this bike has got coil forks, and I'm not quite sure if that is the standard spec for this bike because I've seen a few of them selling second hand with the coil fork. I don't know if they did a limited run with coil forks and now they've changed it to the air forks, but of course this is effectively a lower spec then than the ones that are selling with air forks, and so it probably would be quite disingenuous of me to try and sell it at the top end price of what a bike would normally go with the air forks when it's actually got the coil forks. So I've took some nice photos of the bike. I'm going to list it now and then see how it does at that middle of the road pricing, and then I'll catch up with you to run through the numbers once the bike is sold. Right, so the bike has sold. So let's run through the numbers and see how much we first spent on it. So to start with, the grips were £5.09. The chain was a little bit more expensive because I bought a KMC chain. So that was £13.78. The saddle was £6.49. The tyres as a set of two was £27.99. The front brake, Shimano MT200 again, that was £24.99. The adapter for that to go from 160 to 180mm was £4.99. And the inner tube that I used was £3.99. So that brings a total spend on the bike to £87.32p. And so I suppose in total, the spend on the bike itself and the components comes to £147.32p. Now, I'm not including in this challenge numbers that are really small and convoluted. So things like solvents and like the anti-seize and stuff like that. I'm not including it in the challenge numbers. And I'm also not including the variable expenses as well. So things like mileage expenses, water, and as someone rightly pointed out in the comments of the last video, tax. So in the UK, if you make any money doing pretty much anything, it's highly likely that you're going to have to pay some tax. However, I'm not including it in the numbers of this project because, again, it's so variable depending on person to person. You know, if you're a student doing this without an income, you'll pay a very different tax than someone who's doing this on a 45% tax rate. It's just so variable, and so I don't really want to include those numbers in with it. So I listed the bike for £210 with the hope of getting around £200 for the bike. And I've had it listed for the last 4 days, and in that time I've had loads and loads of interest. Unfortunately, a lot of time wasters. I don't know whether it's just this level of bike or the fact that it's the school holidays in the UK, so there's a lot of people looking for bikes around this price range, but I had loads of time wasters. Anyway, I had somebody contact me this morning and said that they could come pick it up in a couple of hours. The only thing was they'd offered £190, so I considered putting a counter offer for 200 in, but I thought, you know what, I just want to get rid of the bike and get onto the next project, so I accepted. And they came and picked the bike up. They're really happy with it. They're going to be using it for a charity bike ride. So in some ways, I don't mind too much the fact that they've got it for a bit cheaper. So then in terms of our profit, so it leaves us with a challenge profit of £42.68p. And as I say, that's not including all the other variable expenses and stuff on top of that. That's going to be even less of a profit for me personally. And when you look at the time spent on this bike, I think probably around 7.5 hours, the hourly rate is absolutely atrocious. It's probably less than minimum wage. So yeah, there's a lot of risk when you're doing these lower end bikes that aren't going to sell for very much when you do them up, that potentially you're going to have to spend a lot more than the bike is worth. So you've got to be really careful when you're doing these spares and repairs type projects that you don't get caught up in that sort of mess. I think if we hadn't been able to free the Seatpost, I'm almost 100% sure that we would have made a loss on this project. Anyway, so the total cash pot for this series and to go towards the next bike is £508.60p. So yeah, not too much of an increase in this video, but in the next video, we're really moving up into that next level of bike. So hopefully there's a lot more profit to be made. Anyway, I'm really excited for that. If you want to watch the next videos in this series, make sure to click the series playlist here. And if you're all caught up and you want to be notified when new videos come out, make sure to click the subscribe button here. Anyway, thanks ever so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.